The Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.
Welcome to another segment of In Another Opinion, a public information program where our discussions are based and focused on the communities of color in the state of Rhode Island. I'm your host, Peter Wells. My guest today is U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Welcome, Senator.
Hey, Peter. Good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Oh, we're so happy to have you on. This has been an unbelievable year, 9 months therefore of
Isn't it? Because it's only been 9 months.
It does seem like a lot
Dog
longer.
years, right?
Exactly. Sheldon, the country under the Trump administration, it's changed. It's changing, I should say, and maybe not for the better. But in your opinion, what is the future of the country under this administration?
It's hard to say because it's hard to know how long this administration at this point is going to last. Between the upheaval in the Republican Party against the president, a lot of which is quiet still, but you see early Bob Corker's comments, for instance, are an early signal, and he signaled very strongly that he's not alone, that the majority of his caucus feels just the way he does. And the Mueller investigation, which is going to be a very well-run investigation. You know, it's hard to predict what the term is actually going to be.
Exactly.
Does he serve 2 full terms? Does he serve 1 full term? Does he depart office before his term is up? So it's hard to tell. But what is clear at this point is that he has made it a purpose and a political theme of his presidency to tap into old resentments and divisions.
Yes.
And to try to rev up his own base at the expense of a lot of other people, whether it's immigrant communities, African American communities, virtually anybody who cares about progress going forward. It's been kind of stunning for me, frankly, particularly with regard to the white supremacist movement, the ways in which he has given that movement cover and legitimacy is
scary.
Not anything that anybody in our generation who saw the civil rights movement happen around us would ever expect.
It's scary. You know, I'm a news junkie, so I'm watching all the different networks and getting different feels from the different networks' point of view. But it's a very scary time in this country.
Yeah. Well, you've got a nuclear risk from North Korea that doesn't seem to be being handled in a calm and sensible fashion. You've got a nuclear risk that has been, at least for the time being, solved with respect to Iran, and it looks like he wants to undo that, or he's opened the risk of that becoming undone, and Iran going back to building a nuclear weapon again. So on the nuclear side, which is a catastrophic risk, it's hard to feel very safe. And then here in our own country, really basic principles about the press.
Yes.
For instance, calling the press the enemy of the people, and calling the real news outlets the fake news outlets, while you traffic in fake news out of Breitbart and the fringe attack outlets. You know, when you are attacking something as basic as what's true in a democracy, there's a real problem. The First Amendment is very important, and freedom of speech is very important, but what makes free speech valuable is that it's truthful.
Yes.
We prosecute fraud. You can be held accountable for lying. The value of free speech is truthful speech, and this president seems determined to degrade that definition.
Yeah, his actions from a lay standpoint is just throwing the Constitution out the window and just kind of winging it. And example of that, and I wanted to ask you about this. How do you think, how do you think his handling of catastrophes, disasters have been in this country? We've had these hurricanes that have tore up Houston. I've lived there for 4 years. I know what it's like. I've lived in Puerto Rico for 4 years.
Yeah.
I know what hurricanes can be like. I was there for Hugo. How do you think he's handled these situations?
Well, in the wake of the disaster that Katrina was for FEMA. They have done a lot of work to improve their game and to be much more responsive and capable. And so I think the president got a lot of credit for the way that FEMA rolled out hard into Texas and Florida. I think where he hit a heck of a bump in the road was with respect to the hurricane damage in Puerto Rico. For some reason, that was very different in terms of his approach, how long it took to get there, the sort of strange photo ops of tossing paper towels to a friendly crowd, not really getting out and about much to where there was still a lot of damage, and now these unnecessary threats to pull out the federal emergency support before the federal emergency is over. And nothing like that was ever said about either Texas or Florida, or frankly the wildfires out in California, which he's paid very little attention to. So it's been an interesting array. I think that he started out doing well, and by working with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, he was able to get a good deal for additional funding for Texas and for Florida, and he could go down to those places with a win under his belt that the legislature had delivered for him, that the money was there, and that FEMA and the other agencies were all at work. And then I think the wildfires and the Puerto Rico response have compromised that a bit.
Yeah, it almost appears to some folks that there's a indifference to Puerto Rico, as far as the hurricane and of course the wildfires. I don't know why we're not more prepared for that as a country, and we have them every year, and every year we kind of go through the same problem.
And every year they're predictably worse.
Yes.
The wildfire season is expanding at both ends, the time of the year during which these wildfires take place, and the ferocity of the wildfires is getting worse as the climate changes the areas that they burn through. There's just a lot more to burn. It's drier, it's hotter, and across the American West, it's extraordinary. I think, if I remember correctly, the wildfire season has extended by a month on both sides.
I think you're right.
And it's been very, very significant for the people who have to go out and fight those fires, which is really arduous physical work.
And of course, our Congress does, at least part of our Congress, doesn't believe there's such a thing as climate change, but I guess...
Well, they believe it. They just don't want to be caught saying so, because there are very big, powerful special interests that will come in and clonk them on the head for having the temerity to say the words. But I can assure you that the vast majority of my Republican colleagues don't quarrel about the reality of climate change in private conversations.
That's interesting. You mentioned earlier North Korea. Is there something different that he should be doing, in your opinion, with North Korea?
Well, I think the key thing is to be able to send a sober and consistent signal. When you're dealing with an adversary who has intercontinental missiles, who has nuclear weapons, and who has leadership that is deranged is probably too strong a word, but certainly unpredictable, peculiar, pick your word. Kim Jong-un is not a normal sort.
No.
You want to, I think, be sending fairly reliable signals so that you don't provoke something that you don't see coming. You don't inadvertently create a crisis.
Yes.
So I don't see much value in undercutting your own Secretary of State. I don't see how that plays into any valuable scenario for the country. I do think that raising the pressure on North Korea internationally through international sanctions so that it's harder for the workers that they send overseas, more or less as slaves, and have the money sent back to North Korea because they're desperate for foreign money, I think that's a good move. I think ramping up the pressure on China, which has really the key relationship with North Korea, is a good move. So I think they're doing some things that are in the right direction. But the general tone of drama and crisis and uncertainty and threat, fire and fury, all that kind of talk, I just don't see how that's valuable in trying to solve this particular problem. It may make him look good to his base, but it's the expense of actually getting the job done that, as president, it is his job to do.
And now he's, of course, now talking about and has kicked this Iran deal back to Congress. And that interplays with all of this in the Middle East. I mean, it's really looking very scary from our perspective.
And again, it's hard to see the logic. If you see, as Secretary Tillerson has said the administration does, that there is a diplomatic resolution short of nuclear war with North Korea, which I think, if it's achievable, is the obvious preference, then why, while you're in the middle of those negotiations, would you want to show yourself to be an irresolute and disloyal partner when agreements have already been made? You would think that for the sake of North Korea, you'd want to say, well, I don't like the Iran deal, but giving your country's word is giving your country's word, and Americans honor their agreements. That would buttress their ability to get an agreement with North Korea. They're undercutting their own negotiating credibility, it seems to me. And I think, again, it's kind of reckless behavior.
Reckless is a good word to use, and that's a good segue to my next question. The Mueller investigation.
Yeah.
Of course, there's one going on in the House and one going in the Senate as well. From all accounts, it appears that he tactfully tries to obstruct those investigations. At least that's my point of view.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, I think there are times when it looks like he's going down the elements of an obstruction of justice charge and making sure that he's confessed to every single one of them. It's kind of stunning. I'm glad I'm not his personal lawyer in any of these matters, because as a client, he's not helping himself. I think that Bob Mueller, we served together as U.S. attorneys.
Okay.
He was a cut above then. His service at the FBI, where we did a lot of work together. I was on the Intelligence Committee. He led the FBI. We had a lot of engagement. I think very, very highly of Bob Mueller. And everything that I have seen him do in this investigation looks like the right and smart thing to do. So with me, at this point, Bob Mueller has immense credibility, and he's pulled together a terrific team. So I think if there is an obstruction of justice charge, if there are money laundering offenses, if there was collusion, if there are chargeable or even impeachable offenses, then I think Bob can be trusted and his team can be trusted to get to the bottom of it.
Well, it does appear that way, and I'm an ardent follower of this activity, because I have real concerns about our president, or any president that appears to have the kinds of connections with the country that undermined our elections.
Yeah. Well, there are two issues there. One is, does the president have connections with Russia that in some way compromise his decision-making with regard to Russia? Financial interests, dirt that they may have on him,
right.
Connections with the campaign that they may be able to disclose and hurt him, whatever it is. Then there's the, I think, larger issue, which is that every single member of our intelligence and law enforcement community who has testified in Congress has told us the Russians aren't going away.
Right.
They did this in the last election. They're going to keep doing this. They don't even really mind being caught,
right?
Because their meddling helps create the drama and the turmoil that they want to provoke. So what do we do about that? And the problem is that the Trump administration doesn't want to do anything about that. It doesn't want to take any proactive measures. Now, is that because they don't want to raise the issue of Russia? They just hope it goes away, so they're not going to do anything proactive? Or do they not want to provoke Russia because there is, in fact, some of that stuff out there that they need to worry about? We don't know.
Right.
But what we do know is that our law enforcement and intelligence communities have warned us absolutely that the Russians are going to mess around in the 2018 elections, are going to mess around in the 2020 elections. We have good evidence on what it is that we need to do to stop that and to make it more difficult for them, and we're doing none of it.
Wow. It's unbelievable. It's just, there's no words. It's breathtaking.
It's a little breathtaking.
On the lighter side, what are you working on these days, Senator, that Rhode Islanders would be happy to hear about, and people in the country as well?
Well, with we're making good progress. We're the ocean state. We've got important fishing community, and we're doing good bipartisan work on oceans. I set up an oceans caucus when I got to the Senate. It's now 36 or 38 members, very bipartisan, virtually even. And little by little, we're ticking through fishing protections and protecting against the marine, there's plastic all through the seas, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's small, but it's a nice sign that things can happen in a bipartisan fashion. Everything we do has to be passed by unanimous consent.
Yes.
So we're able to get unanimity on those issues. That's
Very
important. Good. The other big issue that I think we need to get more action going on is infrastructure. I'm on the Environment Public Works Committee. The Secretary of Transportation said she would have the Trump infrastructure plan to us by now. So as the Democrats on the committee, we have written a letter to her saying, okay, it's now.
Yeah.
Where's the plan? We're not seeing any sign of it. We really would like to get going on this. And I think that if we don't get a good answer, we are likely to start working on an infrastructure plan that we can propose to our Republican colleagues in the committee to jumpstart it ourselves. I don't know what the problem is, because Elaine Chao, the Transportation Secretary, is a bright and capable person. I just don't know why it is that she can't get approval for an infrastructure plan when it's the one thing that pretty much everybody in Congress agrees we need to do. So they've stepped away from leadership on an issue where the president campaigned for $1 trillion, the biggest infrastructure bill ever, and here it is, well into October, and at least as of the time of this filming, we've got the big O from them.
Do you think some of this might be because of the fact that the administration hasn't been able to fill key positions in many of the agencies to develop these plans?
It could be, but I think there are enough career people at the Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Department of Transportation that is not the issue in this case.
Okay.
I think the issue in this case is that the White House is in such a state of internal turmoil and working so hard to manage this very temperamental president from minute to minute, from tweet to tweet, and from day to day, that it's hard if you're a cabinet member to know who to go to get the thumbs up, go ahead for whatever your proposal is, even if it's something as important to the president as an infrastructure proposal. I think the new chief of staff, General Kelly, is bringing some more order to the chaos, but I think he's had to focus very much on the White House itself to try to begin to create a structure in which people can get answers out of the White House. But it used to be that you had the Bannon door, you had the Priebus door, you had the Ivanka Jared door, and you could come to all of them, but you never knew whether the answer you'd get from them would be the same as another or would be one that the president would stick behind. So I think it's been very hard for the president's cabinet to work with this White House, while so much of its attention has been directed internally to the backstabbing and the fighting and the leaking and the counterattacks of each other and all of the sort of House of Cards drama that we've seen.
I'm going to tell you, as you remember, I was a career employee in the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Yeah.
I was a secretarial appointee. I would be scared to death today in this administration as to actually implement the policies and the regulations of an agency without fear of retaliation
from them.
Reprisal.
Yeah. And on the other side, very often the agencies are given marching orders by the White House that would violate the Administrative Procedures Act, that would fail the test of arbitrariness and capriciousness, that would do, so they've had to actually take orders from the White House and say, well, can't do that, put that in the drawer for now. So I think the tensions go both ways. And if I had to guess, I'd say that's what's behind the failure of the administration on infrastructure. It's not the capability and experience of Transportation Secretary Chao. She is a very able person.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because some of his nominees I don't think were in that same category. I guess Sheldon, that the concern that a lot of constituents, your constituents, friends and neighbors, feel is this uncertainty as to the growth of our country. It's not so much the economic, but the moral growth of this country, and it's being shaped by the White House at this time, and not going in the direction that we were always going on. We're leaving the Obama administration and the things that he was doing to improve the quality of life to where we are with this president. Is any chance that the Congress will slow this process down, get it back on track?
There are a number of ways in which Congress is, I think, serving as a check on the president. The most obvious one is in funding the United States government. Mm-hmm. The budget process, or the funding process would be a more accurate way to describe it, is one where the proposed budget of the Trump administration was so extreme that even Republicans in Congress didn't want any part of it. And they're so difficult to deal with in terms of where can you go to get the straight answer that I talked about before, that I think what the Republicans in Congress more or less said was, look, forget it. Let's not worry about the White House. Let's negotiate with the Democrats. And we put together the funding measure that we're under right now, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, and the White House was barely even in the room for those conversations. So by virtue of being so extreme, they really took themselves out of the conversation. And I think that phenomenon will replicate itself in December, mm-hmm. when the government has to be funded again. We'll see, but that's my judgment. On the more moral issues, things like the Dreamers, the DACA children, things like being harder on African American athletes who take a knee to make a point during the national anthem, which is usually not seen as a sign of disrespect. It's sending a message, but usually taking a knee is seen as a sign of actual respect. Mm-hmm. And treating them harder than the white supremacists who marched under Nazi banners through Charlottesville, those things send really bad messages. And I think it is a little bit harder for the Republicans to push back against that because they don't want to create too much turmoil. I'm sure they have a few colleagues who are comfortable with those views, and it divides their caucus more. But in general, I think there's a very strong sense of dis-ease and distaste among at least my Republican colleagues in the Senate for those kind of unnecessary, divisive, and very often race-based tools of division.
Exactly.
So I think you're going to see more pushback on that front over time. But I would want to assure viewers that even though the Republicans might not be saying as much about this right now as we might like to see, I think there's a real reservoir of concern about that that's going to continue to manifest itself in the weeks and months ahead. This is not America. This is not the direction that even the Republican Party intends us to go. This is a fringe group of people to whom the president is speaking in a way that is unpresidential and divisive, but does not represent either our country or our Congress.
And it's interesting how his close associate, Mr. Banner, has recently declared war against the Republican Party and probably the Democratic Party as well, I suspect. Where do you think that's going to go? What kind of impact will that have on the Congress's reaction to the president?
It's hard to tell, at least from a rhetorical point of view. I don't think it helps the president or the Republican Party to have this Bannon wing out throwing bombs at the party. And anytime you have a civil war going on within a party, it's hard for the party to get its work done because it's busy fighting with itself. So I think Bannon creates a problem in that sense. I don't know how big a following he truly has. Stepping into the Alabama race in favor of Judge Moore after the president was convinced to back our temporary colleague, Senator Strange, was kind of an easy win for Bannon because it looked like Roy Moore was going to clock Luther Strange anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
So it's not really clear that Bannon delivered that. He may just have ridden along on it.
Sure.
So it remains to be seen how much firepower Bannon actually brings to that intramural Republican fight. But even if it's only a little bit, it's a fight that they don't need to have, and I think that they regret. And if he brings real firepower to it, it stands the chance of really disrupting and potentially even defeating the Republican Party.
I was going to say, it appears that this may help tilt the scales in coming up in 18 and in 20 as to what the look of Congress will be in terms of control.
Yeah. And if the Bannonite faction, if you will, were a little bit less wrapped up in what looks like race-baiting, white supremacist, resentment-based stuff, and stuck with the real populist agenda that President Trump campaigned on and abandoned as soon as he got to Washington and surrounded himself with all the big special interests, I think he could actually be fairly productive. Because there are things where we would like to work with the Republicans that are truly populist. And there are things we'd like to take the president up on that he said he would do when he was running for office. But all those doors slammed shut once he got in. And I don't think that the Bannon effort is being very productive in terms of trying to get those populist things accomplished so much as it is trying to appeal to the old resentments.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. From my perspective, I'm very glad to hear that. By the way, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on that poll that I read, where you were listed as the 6th most productive and influential senator in Congress.
Democrat, anyway.
I
don't know how they did it.
I'd say on both.
I don't know how they did it, but I feel lucky, particularly since all the other ones around me were committee chairman, ranking members who have all the committee business that goes through them. So I feel fortunate. And but you know, things like the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act had a big role in getting both the highway bill and the chemical safety bill between not being viable and ready to go and pass on the Senate floor, and the Oceans Caucus work. There's a fair amount going on. I mean, there's a phrase, a fight worth having. And a fight worth having is worth having because it's a fight worth having. And I'm in for the fights that are worth having, but it's also important to keep trying to do things around the fight as productively as you can. It's one of the interesting things about the Senate. Somebody who's your nemesis one day is your colleague and co-sponsor another day.
Listen, Senator, we've run out of time, but I will speak for my friends and relatives. We're glad to have you in the White House and in the Congress.
In the Congress, anyway. Peter, it's wonderful to be with you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And we have run out of time. We'd like to thank Senator Whitehouse for being on the show, and you, the listeners, for tuning in to another segment of In Another Opinion. A special thanks to Rhode Island PBS for making this program possible. I'm your host, Peter Wells. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at inanotheropinion@gmail.com. Have a great day.
The Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.